Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Can you see me?
浜松役でございます。
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Here I am. Sorry for the little glitch. It is August 5th, 2021, 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. I'd like to welcome Mom with Bulldogs, Tyrone Sargent, Thermobsterful, Candace Keith, there's Tyrone again. Gonna cry 96 tears. 96 tears? Question mark in the Mysterians. ECAT, Rita Phillips, Michael Charlie. Great. You might hear a little reverb on this, so don't be alarmed. I think I'm still going to be able to communicate quite well with you today. And I was fortunate today in receiving a message from a friend and colleague of mine. His name, you might have heard of him before in other contexts. His name is Yoichi Shimatsu, right? Paging Yoichi Shimatsu. He is the investigative reporter that I've been following for many, many years, and I happen to have had the opportunity to visit him in Nanjing, China, where he was living and working at the time. And he sent me a recent article of his, and he hadn't been writing for some time. And if you want to find it, by the way, I'll post it on my Patreon site, the full article as a PDF. But also you can find the article on rense.com. That's spelled, RENSE.com, as in Jeff Rense. And you also will have the entire catalog of his previous articles. I think he's up to 29 so far as charting the crisis that has to do with a mystery ailment, which I will not name, but most of you can figure out what I'm alluding to. So today's topic shifted. It's going to still be dealing with the anniversaries of Hiroshima, which will be tomorrow, by the way, August 6th, and then 3 days later, August 9th, Nagasaki. And last time on Tuesday, you got to see a little bit of the David Dionisi documentary, select clips of it, where he really looks at the so-called Brotherhood of Death. We know them as Skull and Bone and other designations, but this same group of players who have taken control, especially, well, they used World War II as an opportunity to consolidate their power, and then certainly in the post-war period into the present, they've been pretty much calling the shots. They, meaning that network, that tight group, that core group, and also the larger network internationally in scope of primarily bankers that are running all the different types of games that we're seeing here. Games, it's hard to get games. It's not like an Olympic game. It's the real thing here. So I retitled it Employing Cultural Forensics Theory, right? I'm going to be calling this one Bio-Olympics 2021. And as I mentioned in the description here, I'm going to understand, or at least I'm going to be exploring this idea of the Tokyo Olympiad 2021 as the herald, as the harbinger of what I am calling the triumphant Bio-Reich. Yes, Yoichi is a great writer. Thank you, Sergeant. Yoichi was very thankful to hear that he has people that read him. He's a really, well, I won't go into it, but he's a really unrecognized writer as far as his contribution, except amongst our circle of people, researchers, readers, and writers who are trying to get at the truth. So I'm sure he'll appreciate that. But first, let me make an announcement. Again, I got plenty of good news in today's mailbox, but coming soon, and I haven't set the date with her yet, but we're going to have a trying day author named Janet Phelan. Her book's coming out. I don't think it's out yet, and I'm not sure of the release date, but we'll let you know. But she's going to come on, hopefully. I've invited her. And she reached out to me, said she's available. So hopefully it'll be next week. But we'll nail that down in time. Just wanted to get you prepared that we're going to get another exciting. We had Jeffrey Kuzmarov not long ago. Now we get another author who's coming out with an exciting book. She's an investigative journalist as well. She has written for the Activist Post, which is an incredibly great independent news, not just aggregator, but they post original articles, research articles, journalistic investigative pieces. But Janet Phelan has also written for mainstream media, which is great. The Los Angeles Times, Orange Coast Magazine. So I'm looking forward to that. And of course, one more announcement before I get into the Yoichi Shimatsu article. And I'm still trying to assimilate it. He threw out a lot of new material out there and a lot of different perspectives. That's what really gets me thinking. I'm pretty much up on the facts and the wheres and the information and all. It's the interpretive area that I really appreciate. His unique analytic mind, and it doesn't just come out of thin air. It not only comes from his background, decades now as a journalist, as a trained journalist, comes out of the journalism school at UC Berkeley, but also a person who comes out of engineering, science, and the biological sciences. He has a very, very strong background there, in addition to a highly, I would say, productive mind, so far as piecing little bits of pieces, information together and coming up with a comprehensive. And I'm not saying that I necessarily subscribe to them, but it certainly makes me think, and more often than not, the more I think about it and follow up on my own independent research, more often than not, I come around to his perspective. So I'm always thankful when Yoichi Shimatsu, is putting out another article. Especially, I haven't heard from him. Well, I did get a message from him a couple of days ago. He was coming through town and we're going to meet up, but he didn't manage to make it up here. But he has been writing lately, not even for rent. And I was just hoping, because he's done such a great job of reporting on Fukushima, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. We might have been talking a lot about Fukushima today, but Yoichi Shimatsu is one of the independent journalists who really got on top of that story in the correct manner, right from the jump. And part of it has to do with his own personal background. He's Japanese American. He's like me. He's a U.S. citizen, but unlike me, he had a lot of education in Japan due to his family circumstances, and he knows his way around there far better than I do, and I'm sure his language is a lot better than mine. So he combines all this together, and I was just hoping that he would do an article about the current Tokyo Olympiad 2021. And sure enough, I guess I put the intentionality vibrations out there, and there it was today. And I said, yeah, I'm not going to wait till next week. I'm going to bring it to the Professor Hamamoto show and all the wonderful live stream people. I'm going to bring it to you now, even though it's going to be in a raw form. And the title of this article is The Tokyo Olympics Horror Show. And notice I emphasize the word horror, the Tokyo Olympics Horror Show. Because independently of Yoichi, as I told you, I haven't been in contact with them, at least not on this topic, right? I came to startlingly, and I'm interested to talk to him about this, I came up with startlingly similar types of conclusions, or at least preliminary conclusions. It's always subject to revision. That's okay. We can change our conclusions. It's not written in stone. In fact, that's what honest researchers, writers do oftentimes. but he focuses on the notion of horror, and I as well. And I found out through reading. I alluded to this book in Tuesday's talk. This is by Dr. James Yamazaki. It's titled "Children of the Atom Bomb: An American Physician's Memoir of Nagasaki and Hiroshima and the Marshall Islands." Remember, this also affected the people in the Marshall Islands. And if you can't seem to muster up sympathy for the victims of both Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I mean, you're going to have a hard time trying to justify your callousness towards Pacific Islanders who had zero to do with starting or waging the Pacific War, yet they were and remain victims of this mass experimental project. And I mentioned last Tuesday that this was a biological experiment, and I mentioned also that I'm going to broach that notion to the Thursday trio. Hope you will join us at 5 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. And we'll bring some information together that helps us draw the connections. And this is not just for the sake of drawing connections. This is for the sake of our survival as a species. No exaggeration. So anyway, let me finish up what I was intrigued by so far as the title, Tokyo Olympics Horror Show. Well, in reading the Yamazaki book, and I'd already been looking at this new area of, for me at least, a novel area of science research, medical research. It's called tetralogy. Yeah, I guess that's it's that new. It's called tetralogy, and what that is, that specialty has to do with the study of human malformation, human, I guess, horrors, if you want to put it in blunt terms. And again, I hesitate here because I do not want to stigmatize or, in any sense, denigrate people who suffer from physical impairment, malformations, or intellectual impairment. I am focusing in here on the engineering, the bringing forth of human debility and malformation consciously by the same lineage of scientists and policymakers and secret society members who want to maim humanity, right? We talk about eugenics, and typically, most of you know about eugenics, right? So when you think about eugenics, it's mostly like, oh, you want to exterminate us, right? You don't want us around. You're going to wipe out a large segment of the population, Georgia Guidestones, all that. You know the whole argument, right? But there's a more subtle aspect of eugenics that I'm introducing here from the cultural forensic perspective that I'm going to be previewing for you here in the chat room. Hi, infidel apostate. Hi, deep Great Falls. Harry Haneke. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. It's going by too quickly for my spiritual compass. So yeah, for your purpose, I'm going to be advancing the hypothesis. I'm going to suggest that the Tokyo Olympics 2021 is not only a biological experiment using the best athletes in the world congregating in one place, and we've seen where that's been done before, right? In the on military games, right? And we're going to see some, as I was suggesting last Tuesday, some long-term genetic damage to these elite athletes, these super athletes who've been brought up from all the different parts of the world, and exposing them to certain vectors that I will not specify, but you're following this crisis, and you know as good as I do what these vectors are specifically. So I'll just leave it vague for now. So we're in what I call the teratological age. That's a mouthful. And that is an age where tetralogy, the science of the study of malformation, has gone from it being examined to prevent it and to work at ways of remediation or preventive strategies to an age of weaponization. And we know that's a common duality or dialectic that the whatever they might be, the Brotherhood of Death or the banks or NATO, you name your organization, you know that they typically go at it firstly with the humanitarian. They come in with the humanitarian jab, and then the second by humanitarian. I don't want to use that term. Yeah, they come in with a humanitarian, charitable, hospitalitor, like the Knights Hospitalier, right? They come in with a hospitality angle, and then they come in with the sword, right? The sword and shield, and the takeover, and that's the phase we're in now. So that's why I call it the teratological age. There's another. This is really what got me into this and tipped me off. During my last years at the University of California, Davis, I saw a huge amount of money, that is grant and research money and funding from government agencies, supposed nonprofits, and university money going to primarily women and gender studies, but also people in the English department, the humanities, because they were feeling left out, oh, God, the computer in the digital age. Oh my gosh, who wants to study Chaucer and Shakespeare? By the way, there's an initiative called the Digital Humanities to co-opt people who otherwise would have a quite critical take on the current crisis, but instead they're being bought off. But nonetheless, I was seeing the money that was of it, the little money that was available for the humanities, going into study of malformation, deformation, and aberration, not just behavioral aberration, but also the glorification, really, the malformation of humanity, right down to the body, and further, by implication, down to the molecular level, to the genetic level. And I'll give you one example before moving on. There's one person, I can't remember, it's one of the superstars in they call it queer theory, queer studies, or women and gender studies. They call it something, they just call it theory. It was one of the superstars. I can't remember what her name was, but she gave a talk about the Vitruvian man, the perfectly proportioned, according to the Renaissance thinker, philosopher, mystic, occultist, Vitruvius, right? That Leonardo da Vinci, the classic drawing of the man who's perfectly proportioned. He's in a circle and there's all these triangles. That's called Vitruvian man. So this wise ass was giving a talk at Yale or one of the, because it's coming out of the Brotherhood of Death, right? It's the Ivy League. It's the same group of people that are funding the bio program, right? The same group of people. So the smartass was giving a talk about, it's the end of the Vitruvian man. We're going to push malformation and this idea of beauty is just so bourgeois and so passe and so yesterday. We're cutting edge theorists. We're cutting edge post-structuralists. We read Michel Foucault and all the continental philosophers and the thinkers, the cutting edge people who are going to take us into the new round of funding for our own professional advancements. The good part of it is that they're typically not very serious about their argument. They are serious about their own professional status. And if they're going to be promoting this particular line of inquiry, it's to advance themselves. But like us, we do not want to really, I don't think they want to really see something take place like that famous bar scene in Star Wars. Remember, you had all these different chimeras, right? Gosh, what was Steven Spielberg or George Globalist, right? What was being communicated to us as early as Star Wars, right? We're going to be a population of teratological beings, right? They call them chimeras or chimeras. but they're going to be all manner of creatures that's going to be the new norm. And the Tokyo Olympics 2021 is the experimental workshop where this whole process, this new age of malformation, is going to be rolled out. Now, some more before I move on. A few more data points that you might be aware of, and certainly I am. But and this holds true for me. I don't know if it's hardwired or not, but most children, especially boys, for some reason, and I don't mean to be sexist, but most children are really interested in what might be called, or used to be called, freaks. I'll use that term for you. There was a great film, 1932, by Todd Browning, a great film called Freaks. It's about circus freaks. And they used to be common, right, back in the days of P.T. Barnum and really until probably the 30s. You would have these carnivals and circuses, and they'd have a freak show. The bearded lady. I don't know if you remember the film The Elephant Man, right? A British movie, and this is not uncommon. And there were some social reformers that brought an end to that. And ironically, the livelihood of people who would be in these carnivals and in these so-called freak shows, they lost their livelihood, right? They were, perhaps it wasn't the best job in the world, but at least they were able to perform their acrobatics or magic tricks or make some sort of livelihood in a community that traveled around. So that be careful what you try to reform, right? And most of us remember The Wizard of Oz, right? You had I forgot the name, it was a troupe of, they were called something's midgets, Marshall's Midge or something like that. They hired most of those from that particular group, and they became the Munchkins, right? So there's an inherent fascination there. But up until recently, we were assuming that there's a category of people here for genetic reasons, or it's been studied through a teratological science, by the way, pioneered by the scientists who studied radiation, not only radiation sickness, but radiation malformation or tetralogy in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But we, up until recently, saw this as being outside of us, right? But now it's going to be mainstreamed. And I'll give you a third reason why I think this is going to happen. In addition to all the funding, to all these wise assets they're very smart, right? They have all the technical jargon to make you feel like, oh, this is a real science here. And it's a small coterie of people, and all the second-tier universities are supposed to worship them, because there is a star system even in the academic world, right? Just like Anthony Fauci's the god of bioscience, supposedly. His reign might be coming to an end because there's a guy or a gal behind him who wants to push him off the stage, and they're going to do it stealthily when the time comes. But be that as it may, I was also seeing an upswing in research funding going into an area called disability studies. Disability studies. And it was going on the familiar territory of the civil rights movement and the women's movement and on and on. And now, and of course, gay rights and GLBTQ. And we saw where that went, right? It started out innocently enough, and I think most of us who are watching here have no problem about equality amongst all human beings. But then we saw the GLBTQ movement being hijacked by a group of people that have perverted it and all its goals. While the GLBTQ community, the honest part, which is the majority, have remained silent. So the same process is unfolding now that everybody makes fun of it now, right? On the media, oh yeah, get a bullhorn out and just tease them and make fun of Jigglypuff, right? I mean, I never did that because I knew what they were really up to. So the next one to replace that is the next phase, and that's disability studies. And again, it's going to be presented as a way to integrate people with various mental, physical disabilities into the larger population, which I think most of us are for. And there is legislation put through by the Kennedy family themselves, the Americans with Disabilities Act, right? That's the civil rights legislation that not very many people know about that. We have the late Senator Edward Kennedy to thank that. And as I explained in previous talks, the family themselves had a sister or sibling or a daughter, Rosemary Kennedy, who suffered from I guess emotional mental problems, right? I don't like to use the term psychological problem. That's too global. But she had problems, and there were all kinds of different therapies that they subjected her to that didn't end well. Read the biography of Rosemary Kennedy. It's very instructive on many, many levels. So we have legislation on the books now, but so why now the push for disability studies? My thinking is, because I'm always kind of trying to sniff out what the hidden agenda is, my thinking is that disability is going to be the new normal. So, and of course, by new normal, I'm going to be talking about physical deformity, behavioral aberrant behavior by any standards, right? Some people now it's the satanic, whatever you want to call it, it's aberrant, right? The taking of life and the harming of animal and human life, sentient life in general, is not acceptable all around the world. But we're moving into this new post-human, transhuman age where human life has been denigrated and diminished. And you know about abortion, and you know about where that has taken us, right? It was presented to us in the rhetoric of reproductive rights. Right, and we know the story, especially the people in the live chat. You see the reports about how the organs of unborn children are sold on the open market for those who can sell it, right? I mean, it's not illegal, and you have Planned Parenthood who's implicated in that, right? So many, many examples of that. So here is the ideological justification coming in from the left side. And when I say left, I also mean political left, because most of these people view themselves as leftists. They're progressive, whereas we are just conservative. But you know what? I come from the left too, and I don't subscribe to their beliefs. I think fewer and fewer leftists are going along with their program. That's the good news of today. They realize that, hey, they're in the barrel just like you and me, right? So it's not just a redneck thing. It's just not a bitter clinger thing. It's a human thing. So even your ass clown, Bill Maher, is starting to change his tune now. Of course, he's kind of like an escape valve, right? To kind of get our hopes up that there's change around the corner. There is change around the corner, but we're going to make it, not Bill Maher or some elected official or somebody. Please, Mr. Government, please help us. We're appealing to you. No, we're going to do it ourselves. We're Americans. The government works for us, not the other way around. So we're going to be we're at the beginning stage of the teratological age, as I call it, because we're at the end of the Anthropocene, according to all the smartasses from women and gender studies and comparative literature. You have the endowed chair at Yale University, talking about affect and trauma. So you're riding pretty high, but you don't realize you're being used to usher in the teratological age of malformation and mental debility. All right. You heard it first here from Professor Hamamoto. I've been right many, many times. This is not preordained, however. I'm telling you now so that we can be alert from the jump here so that they don't get an advantage, a strategic advantage of us over here. You'll know what to look for now. You'll see the signs. You'll hear the buzzwords, and you're going to be sensitive to it, and you're going to challenge it right now before it really takes root in our institutions. Just like the whole social justice deal kind of snuck up on people. Come on, if any of these students who were in my class for the past 20 years, they would have known what was coming on. And that's one of the reasons why they didn't want me to have contact with them. But I'm speaking to you now, and that's even better because most of you have life experience and can identify, you can recognize what I'm talking about here in your own experience, your own life experience. So that's why they had, Michael Aquino, Lieutenant Colonel now, I think that was his last rank, promoting Satanism and, the Church of Set. That was just a theater, right? Because what he was really promoting was the neutron bomb, the NATO-sponsored neutron bomb, which emits radiation. He was preparing us for the satanic, if you want, you can leave Satan in or you can take him out. It's up to you. It's optional. Although he does run a lot of game on us, right? I don't deny that. So you have the satanic teratological age being put through by Colonel Aquino while we're being distracted by all the more dramatic and obvious aspects of his little theatrical performance part along with his wife, right? See how clever they are? But you know what? We're more clever than them. So let me, I don't know if I've convinced you that we are going through the teratological age. It's something for you to think about. I'm not even fully convinced that it's going to happen. It will happen, I think. It is happening unless we recognize it and take precautions right now. At the same time, while loving all and helping and sheltering all the people that do suffer from debilities, physical, spiritual as well. I mean, you can always be, you can always have a change of heart, even to the point of death. Even, I won't name any names, but if you confess your sins, you will be forgiven. So we will recognize the people who are hurting and embrace them, and even forgive them, forgive their trespasses. Right? You know the you know the drill. So let me talk a little bit about the article. There's a subtitle here, but I'm not going to read it because I don't want to get another strike and then miss being here with you people, right? My tribe. I got to get the word out, right? So it's the Tokyo Olympics horror show. This is part 29. Again, go to rense.com to see the full, just follow it on and on, right? And he's saying here that in Japan, see, we're not getting this from mainstream media. That should not be a surprise. But the Japanese public itself is highly disapproving of even holding the 2021 Olympics in their own country or in Tokyo. They're against about 60% are against it. That's a pretty good. It's a pretty good majority. It's not like 51 to 49. This is according to Yoichi Shimatsu, the National Bulls. I haven't asked him about the poll. I want to look at it first. I want to see it. I want to interpret it, but that's a pretty substantial number. They're against the Olympics being held, and for reasons that I think and I know why. Because the athletes are in harm's way. They're being put in harm's way deliberately. Now, it's so bad. The lack of consensus amongst the Japanese is so against holding the Olympics that major international level companies, Fortune 500 companies, are saying, we're not going to sponsor, we're not going to have any, because, most large corporations want to pour money for advertising into the Olympics. It's a big extrap every 4 years, a huge extravagance and brand recognition and the support of athleticism and human. Who doesn't want to be associated with that, right? But no, companies of the stature, including Toyota, you've heard of them, Panasonic, right? P&G, which I don't know what that is, but Toyota and Panasonic, and even that, should tell you they're not putting any money behind. It's not because they're hurting in terms of profit. They don't. And I'd be interested to see what the process was for them withholding any sort of support of it. But they, from the upper level people or the stockholders might have a conscience, or they don't want liability because there's going to be some serious health consequences that come out of the Tokyo Games. And of course, it's being played off. I don't really follow gymnastics. Perhaps I should. It's a great sport. But there's apparently a woman named Simone Biles. I don't know. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing. If you're a gymnast fan, please forgive me. But I do know enough that she's at the top of the field. I think she's won like 4 American national champions. In other words, she was slated to bring a lot of gold back with her from the Tokyo Olympics, but she withdrew early. And I read about a week or two that she was having problems just in working out. And she would try. I think they gave her, according to Yoichi, I don't know because I don't follow the Olympics, boycotting the Olympics. She was given sort of a sympathy bronze medal for one of her events. And so I checked it out. I looked at some of the articles, and people are writing, right? Even Al Jazeera. What happened to Al Jazeera? Kind of got taken over or something by Slim Helou, Carlos Slim Helou, the guy that bought most of the New York Times, right? Or maybe Jeff Bezos bought Al Jazeera. I don't know, but the editorial policy is almost indistinguishable from the Washington Compost. But they're all spinning it. Well, she's rising above the sport and she's showing us the true meaning of competition. And it's because they want to take attention away from the possibility. And I'm not saying it's definitive, it's a possibility. They're taking away from the possibility that this elite athlete, Simone Biles, might be suffering from the after effects of no, I'm not going to say it. Because apparently it has some sort of effect on the prefrontal cortex and the fast twitch muscle. I don't know. I'm not a physiognomist or a coach or someone who's remotely acquainted with body science, let's call it, or human physiology. But there are some connections there, and then we find out that she's not the only one. The guy that was supposed to win the hurdles, I think it was high hurdles, can't remember. He's American by nationality. He was it's gonna be a cakewalk for him, but he came in second place. Some guy from, kudos to him, congratulations. But he's from Denmark. He beat the American champion. When was the last time that happened? In the hurdles, in these sports that America historically has dominated. So we're seeing, even amongst the most elite of athletes, we're seeing some fall off, to put it charitably, in performance in competition. And this is not even taking into consideration the genetic damage that possibly might be had. I'm always qualifying it here because I don't know either, but we have to posit certain hypotheses. We have to recognize some possibilities here. It could be a consequence. So anyway, let's let me read section here from our friend Yoichi Shimansa. I want to get him on the show. I would like to have a live stream with him. Wouldn't you? Yes, I think you would. He's been he's been busy, so I haven't been pressuring him. He's scrambling like the rest of us, right? So, but hopefully I can get him to comment in the Olympics on this great article. Reading an excerpt here, it says, Olympian athletes from Western countries are dropping like swatted flies in Japan or blowing their routines with otherwise inexplicable slip-ups of eye-body coordination, including the once flawless gymnast Simone Biles. discussed below in this article. An Irish boxer and a Canadian diver, to name a few of yesterday's champions, now, I'm not going to say why, they might be suffering from subpar, by their own standards, athletic performance. Now, this is interesting, and we know that the history of American eugenics and British eugenics, the eugenics concept, complex, rather, that there's always a racial component to it. In the case of Margaret Sanger, I don't need to rehearse that sad figure in American medical as well as social and political history, because she helped pass legislation, for example, to exclude Asians. It was because of her advocacy that said, "Oh, these subhuman people from Asia, this is my people, right? We're going to." And her buddy Madison Grant wrote articles. He was I can't remember, most of the professors of sociology, the founding fathers, they were eugenicists. So they wrote articles that went to Congress that helped to justify the what they called the Oriental Exclusion Act of 1924. Now, my grandparents came before then, so they were not excluded, but Asians were excluded from U.S. immigration from 1924 to 1965. And that's one of the reasons why I got an Asian American study. I wanted to find out what's going on here. But this is a curious twist that Yoichi Shimatsu really forced me into a brain mashup here, cognitive dissonance, if you will. And I'm not sure where he's going with this, and I'm not even sure of his premises. But he has a whole section here. I hope you read the whole thing, because I'm not doing justice. Read the whole article. He has a whole section here called Between the Races. And here's the kicker here. It says, the global contests to determine which nations are the fittest to survive and thrive has thus far proven that Asians are healthier and quicker than other races. And he has parenthetically race here, referring to skin complexion and genetic code rather than track times and scores. He's being a little cute here, right? It says the emerging triumph of yellow over white, black, and brown was achieved by a single factor, a not so secret weapon of mass destruction called, you fill in the blank. Northeast Asia's rising prowess at sports is due to general immunity amongst the Chinese and Korean populations whose ancestors had historical contact with Japan, which he says is the original source of the over the past centuries. By contrast, isolated island of Hainan province had sparse contact with Japan, which was therefore more vulnerable to the outbreak that coincided with the CISM World Military Games held in Wuhan in October 2019. George Webb is going to be very intrigued by this article, and I'll bring it up to him on the Thursday trio. He also knows about the great work of Yoichi Shimatsu, of course. So, hey, do you think it's a coincidence that you have Showtime, right? Who's just really like knocking it out of the park, literally, for the California Angels, in addition to being a starting pitcher, rather, right? I mean, do you think that's a coincidence? Sports has always had this sort of dual meaning. It's partly political, maybe it's mostly political, and it's also athletic, right? I'm speaking of Showtime, right? Showtime, Otani, not Otani, Otani. Okay, this is let me see here. I didn't get a chance to mark it up here, but he mentions our friend over at the University of Wisconsin. He's a Japanese national. I'm not going to even say his name, right? You're following. If you're on the live stream here, you know who I'm alluding to. He's the guy at the University of Washington. By the way, their animal mascot is the Badgers, which do you think that's an accident? I don't know, because the Badgers supposedly one of the animals that were used in the British laboratories in order to put forth or carry forth this agenda of animal spreaders, right? So there's this notorious guy whose name starts with a K and ends with an A, who works with the NIH and that massive grant at the University of Wisconsin. But what's interesting here that, let's see, where is it? He talks about, here. This is interesting. And I have some background here, like Yogi's personal background, historical background. So I can follow his argument where it may not be as obvious to you here. So I'll try to unpack it for us. There's a whole section here of this article. I wasn't meaning, by the way, to spend so much time on this article. I think it's so important that I'm going to go with this. I'm just, because we're already at 3:45, I'm going to stay with this, and maybe we'll talk about Fukushima more specifically next Tuesday or some other time, right, in the future. It's not perishable. This information is perishable. It's really important for us to assimilate it, to understand it and assimilate it very quickly, because our survival depends on it. And there's a section called the Paleo History of the, it starts with a C and ends with a us. So reading from Shimatsu here, the parent strain of the present gene engineered wheat has its origins in Japan. That's news to me. Specifically, the northern half of Honshu and the subarctic northern islands of Hokkaido, which were once the ancient homeland of the indigenous Ainu tribe and their allied Nishika. That's the political nation. They went to war against Japan, the lower part of Japan, right? But they were taken over, but they were indigenous people. And according to Shimatsu, I didn't know this about him, he has on his mother's side some genetics of this Ainu group. It's a distinct ethnic group, and they've been studied intensely by anthropologists, social, cultural, physical anthropologists, sociologists, you name it, and the geneticists more lately, to find out how does this group wind up in Japan. Because most people, when you think of Japan, you think of guys with glasses and a black business suit, or for women, they're dressed in sailor suits doing coordinated dance moves. But indeed, Japan is an ethnically diverse society. It's primarily of a certain northeastern genetic group, right? Very much related to Chinese and contemporary, right? Current Korean, right? Those are the Yayoi people going back 2,500 years or so. And that all has been documented, right? But not very many people know about the other strains. And the deal is that our friend at the University of Wisconsin hails from that area. Hokkaido is the northernmost island where these Ainu groups were holed up. They used to be throughout Japan, but they were gradually pushed further and further north by the ascendant samurai classes, the Date clan, for example. I've been up in that area. I've traveled. I haven't been to Hokkaido, but I've been through northern Japan. I've been to Futaba, which was the city where the evacuees were from the Fukushima Impatsu evacuation. Right? I went there, by the way, 1 year after the 2011 event, but I'll get into that later. But the deal is that this is what Yoichi did tell me, because I did spend some time with him, about a week solid, in his apartment. And he was also running a news organization there, and his editor-in-chief was also living in the same facility. But I learned from talking to him at work and in our off hours that his mother was carrying him. He was in utero when the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima. She was in Kobe, but I think she got some kind of exposure. So they're called hibakusha, the people who are exposed to nuclear. So he was irradiated in the womb. And as a result, he thinks, because he snuck into the proscribed zone in Fukushima shortly after he bicycled in there, shortly after the earthquake and the subsequent meltdown of the nuclear reactors. And he didn't suffer any ill effects. So he thinks that it might have been some sort of not autoimmune, but some sort of immunity that he had gotten. But now he's saying that the current vector that we're not going to name here and the ability of East Asians to handle it much better goes back to Paleolithic adaptations to these types of vectors coming in and hitting these populations, and the survivors adapting to it. And as a consequence, their descendants today in 2021 being less susceptible to suffering the ill effects of this, whereas other racial groups, including Americans who are multiracial, I don't know about for the most part, but to a large extent, don't have that generational immunity to this. So that's kind of a speculation on Yogichi's part, but I think we have to take it seriously and follow up on it, see the literature, and I want to talk to him and maybe have him on this show to unpack some of this, because this is an article, it has to be condensed. I want him to unpack a little bit of his statements here, but it's certainly adding to our research, does it not, this type of approach here, and why Japan has a very, very low rate. In the US, it's supposedly 2/3 of the population, right? I don't know, it's probably exaggerated, but let's say even if it's 50%, that's a substantial number of people. Whereas in Japan, their approach is polar opposite of the United States of America, the Five Eyes countries, Italy, and other NATO-controlled semi-feudal nation states, right? So we're going to have these control groups here, and of course we've been following what Mr. Zhao Jian, of the consul general, I guess he is in Chicago. He's in the U.S. right here. What he's been asking the U.S. government, the NIH, to do is to produce data, information, research, so that we can get at a deeper understanding of what's going on here. Because at this point, we're all involved. We're all in the whole world requires answers, right? And it does us no good to point the finger, say, well, what about the rape of Nanjing? Or what about, the Uyghurs in the West? You people don't believe, or Hong Kong, you're so nasty and brutal. We can't really, we can deal with it, yes, but right now the crisis, the extreme crisis that we're being subjected to here unnecessarily, some would argue. I said some will argue. I'm not saying I argue this. Requires the coming together of all these disparate sources. That is true diplomacy. That is true medicine. That is true international relations. That is true political science. That is true feminism. That is true epidemiology, right? So let's move in that direction. So I'm going to leave this article for now and conclude with let's see here. Conclude with let's see here. Got some really interesting they call it predictive programming. I don't use that phrase, but here's an interesting article, an academic one that comes out of the University of Manitoba, Journal of Interdisciplinary Studies. The future of is history, and the subtitle is 12 Monkeys and the Origin of AIDS. I'll post this on my Patreon because it's a very dense article, but it has much of the information that we need in order to break the impasse, the embargo that the mainstream media is imposing on us and their various lackeys. Some of them celebrities, and most of them are supposed journalists, right? And the reason why this article and others like it are important is because They're talking about the laboratory, and it's been, I won't say definitively, but for the most part, to the satisfaction of even a lot of experts, they will agree that the origins of so-called AIDS laboratory based. They didn't come from the green monkey. They didn't come from patient zero or all these different scenarios that we heard back in the 80s or that still circulate, right? It's but it's been what, 20, 30 years now. We don't really have the luxury of 2 or 3 decades to figure out what the origins of the current pandemic are, do we? Not if even part of the fear mongering that's put out there is true. Even if it's partly true, we're in serious trouble unless we get to the root of this question very quickly. So, and I'm arguing, of course, that the cultural forensics approach is going to be one of the determinant means of breaking through the blackout information and interpretation. Now, just to let the people who are promoting deformity, malformation, the end of the Vitruvian man, and promoting the whole post-human reality, those people, the smartasses, I call them, in women and gender studies and comparative literature, holding endowed chairs at Yale University, your time is over, because you know what? There's a whole new school of critical theory that's coming out that talks about what's going on here is beyond left and right, beyond communism and Marxism, beyond capitalism versus socialism, beyond sexism versus beyond racism. They're saying that we're now at the point of what they call the biopolitical. And one thinker calls it, he calls it necropolitics. Necro is in dead. He says we are in a historically unique, well, not just him, but others in this school, and I'm trying to catch up. I'm reading them day and night as I acquire the books here. But they're saying we are in a historically, civilizationally unique epoch here that people like Foucault, who I've lambasted here many times, pointed us to. He didn't complete the work, but these people took his insights and say we are in a new biopolitical or necropolitical system here where government is now subordinate to a small cadre. You can call them the culture of death. I'm not really sure who they are, but we know they're institutional faces, the NATO, its offshoots, the Pentagon, and NIH and WHO. You know, the usual suspects. We know this, but the larger picture is that, and they're not even aware of this. We have entered into what I call the teratological age. They call it the biopolitical, the necropolitical. I call it the teratological, because the goal here is to make humanity so unappealing and malformed and even disgusting, right? Again, I don't want to stigmatize or bully or in any way mock people with any type of deformity, debility, or handicap. I'm saying what the handlers are doing is to make the general population so repulsive and so unlike the Vitruvian man and Vitruvian woman, just to completely destroy any notion of beauty, so that they'll be much easier to exterminate. After all, they're disgusting, right? They're repulsive. They're aberrations. They're abortions of nature. They're horrific, right? And that's one of the reasons why I just thought of this, why we're being deluged on Netflix with unremitting films on horror and deformity, and we have these hotshot directors who are being brought forth in order to make James Whale, who directed Frankenstein and the Bride of Frankenstein, and all these other monster movies that we grew up with as a kid, to make them look like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, right? That's part of the extermination. I can't even call it eugenics, because it's gone way beyond that. I'll call it the teratological imperative that the small group of central bloodline bankers, including the House of Clockwork Orange, Nassau, right, but the kindly tulips and the windmills and wooden shoes, right, whereas the Japanese are just stark-witted fanatics who don't know the meaning of human life. You have, why does this one group get away and the other is characterized in such a fashion? So that's where we're at today, ladies and gentlemen. I see I'm out of time. I'm going to bring forth some of these issues to John O'Loughlin and George Webb when we meet 1 hour from now, and I invite you to join us. It's my favorite show of the week, and we're going to really dig in, and you're going to see the sparks fly, I'm sure. I'm also going to talk about the Knights Templar, and I'm going to prove to you that it's just not something that people on YouTube talk about. I'm going to prove to you that it is a historical thing. The Knights Templar, the Tennessee Templar, it is a thing, and it is hardwired. It is baked into the U.S. military. How do I know this? I got the books. I found them. Oh, yeah, right from the stacks of Harvard College. They've taken them off the shelves, but they have all been kind of, put through the Google process. They all been scanned, and I got them, baby. And I'm going to share this information with John and George in an hour. All right. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Kathy Sue, Spiritual Compass, Eddie Phillips, The Mule, Zaka Nostra, Horsense 222, Debbie Sopina. Thank you very much, John Smith. We'll see you in an hour. Thank you very much. Take it easy. Bye.